Apple TV Plus halts production of Natalie Portman's series after alleged extortion threat from armed drug dealers in Baltimore. It's a very...
I mean, what did you expect filming in Baltimore, though?
I think this is so funny. Is that bad?
It's kind of like...
I mean, a little bit.
This is... The funny thing is, okay, this show... let me pull it up here. This show is... It's based on a book written by... Her name is... I was literally just looking at it right before we started here, and of course, I can't remember it off the top of my head. Let me get into it here. So basically, it's written by the lady it's David Simon's wife. David Simon wrote The Wire, which is a very famous Baltimore show, but it's based on a book by his wife, who is also a reporter for the Baltimore Sun, right? So it's all roads lead back to Baltimore, but it feels like they don't have the ability to realize that it's not the safest place in the world to be filming. And it reminds me of every, show that's ever taken, like a scene in Mexico where like the cartel comes into town and basically tells you that you got to pay your fair share if you want to be protected.
Yeah, it just makes me think that Hollywood thinks they can come into anywhere and be exempt from like goings-ons and norms, which I guess maybe is
and
true.
Taxes.
Yeah, like they think they make their own rules. I'm surprised we don't hear about this happening more often, to be honest. I mean, I think probably places that film in slightly dangerous areas do have certain amounts of theft or
you would have
vandalism.
heard a lot more about it if the cast had been present for this, but it was actually just the crew members.
I feel like, what I'm saying is like places or things that film, what I'm saying is I think this happens not to this level, but vandalism or theft happens on other sets that goes underreported because the Hollywood unit doesn't want to look like they are somehow looking down on inner city places.
They talk about that in here, kind of. They're like, we can't wait to get back to filming in Baltimore. While they're literally
we can't wait to film in the vibrant community of Baltimore.
It reminds me of just recently, an actual worker for one of the Law and Order shows was shot and killed outside of, remember that? Like
I do remember
they were
that.
working security for Law and Order, and that person was shot and killed at like 5 a.m. And I think the common thing here is like, remember, this one, that one, the actors aren't present when it happens, which makes it a lot easier for people to dismiss.
I think it's also worth noting that, like, as you said, when was The Wire filmed? I mean, in the early 2000s, right? So
it was just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, back then.
I think, well, what
it was
tells
also
you is
before there
violent-
was the same conversation going on about.
Well, I also think that violent crime is on the rise in most cities in America and has been for the last about 3 years.
Yep.
So it's worth noting that, like, we are not learning anything because we cannot read the actual news and be honest about like the state of crime in this country because we're afraid of talking about things that would come along with that.
It's been politically charged now, so you can't have honest discussions about it. So it says a driver on the crew was on the set for the filming of Lady in the Lake at around 4 p.m. when he said that the armed drug dealer accosted him and said the filming has to stop. The two then allegedly said that unless the production company gave them $50,000, they would come back that evening and shoot people. Can you say that on here? I think we can say that.
I guess. I mean, they were going to shoot people while shooting
a show. Yes,
a show. So
maybe they were just auditioning.
They're like, we wanted to come and make you guys stars.
What was surprising to me about this is they said out of an abundance of caution, we're halting filming for Friday for like the rest of the day. But like, it's not really an abundance of caution if they just straight up threaten to kill you if you come back.
Yep. So
we don't know if they were serious, though. Maybe they were joking.
Right.
Well, they said they were going to change locations to they're going to shoot the scene somewhere else to like a different part of Baltimore where maybe that guy just doesn't go.
I want it to be so they like just completely leave Baltimore.
I mean, wouldn't they be in a nice part anyway?
Not necessarily. The Wire used to film in very, very, like I said, I don't know about this, but The Wire used to film in some pretty gnarly locations.
Well, and like I assume the background of wherever you're filming, the reason to film in location is to like depict how the streets actually look.
So it says Endeavor Content, the studio behind the series, said in a statement Sunday that they were working with police to identify the suspects that allegedly threatened the crew. The safety and security of our crew, cast, and all who work across our productions is our highest priority, and we are thankful no one was injured. Production will resume with increased security measures going forward. And then the Baltimore mayor, Brandon Scott, decried the incident. That's also really interesting, too, because like you'd think it would be in their best interest to have as safe of a city as possible for production if you want to encourage people to come film there. But that doesn't.
You would also think that they'd have the safest city possible for business owners,
or like people who live there,
who
not
live
just like
there.
in Hollywood to film.
If you're thinking of them as business owners, then if you're thinking of them as just contract business owners, you would want to present the safest city possible. But it reminded me of this story about there's a show being shot right now called Justified City Primeval, which is based on the Timothy Oliphant FX series from, I'm sorry, was it AMC or FX?
I remember
FX.
this.
So this one says an incendiary device was thrown near the set in Chicago. There's a pattern here. There's cities that are not in the best shape as far as their.
What was even the motive behind that incident?
We don't want the show without Boyd Crowder, and then they throw an incendiary device because they didn't hire Walton Goggins back for City of Primeval. I'm
sad about that too, just because Goggins is a great name.
Walton Goggins is a fantastic actor. You guys know what I'm talking about. People watching right now know what I'm talking about. The incident happened 3 weeks after production on the FX drama was halted after 2 cars whose occupants were engaged in a gunfight smashed through the show's barricades. No one was injured during the intrusion, though shell casings were found on the set later. Hey, maybe this is what happened to like Alec Baldwin. Maybe there was like a shootout with actual people, and like somebody just dropped a gun,
and
he was just
defending himself.
And that's what happened. Like and then I actually dumped a story today about how they had like a new bill, got one of the bills that got brought into legislation for the set of Rust got dumped. Because they're just like, the union has all the power in Hollywood. So they're like, sorry, we want to make the set safer, just not that.
Yeah, and there
way.
would definitely, I think, be more impetus to change the legislation if the stars were affected. Like if Natalie Portman were on set when something like this happened.
This article would have been 10 times longer.
Yes. I think this would be a lot bigger of a story. It actually took some effort to find it yesterday.
Yeah.
I've been seeing this all day, and they were talking about it on the radio yesterday. I think it is being somewhat widely reported. I think part because people think Hollywood productions are protected. People think that like when a film studio decides to come to your town and film, everyone is just so grateful to have the industry and so grateful to have the business that there's no way any criminals would ever interact with it. And that's why I said before, I think probably stuff does happen that they don't talk about. I also think
was it that we were talking about recently where they shut down so many streets in was it Iceland? And like all of these businesses weren't able to open.
for Batgirl. They closed.
Was it in Iceland or am I making that up?
I think it was Ireland or something. It wasn't Iceland. It was but it was for Batgirl, and all those businesses are now not going to get to see the movie on screen.
No, it was in Scotland. Yeah. And they all of these businesses were strained so much by all the streets being closed down, and then they didn't even get the free advertising of being in Batgirl, of having their logos showing in the movie.
Imagine you're like on that set, and then they like change the logo of your business in post to like.
Well, they did force some of the businesses to cover up their logos, but some of them didn't have to. I don't know how they determined that. But it was just like you didn't even get the satisfaction of like getting a little bit of a cameo and like once the film was dumped, and they weren't compensated properly for it.
No,
and I think it just shows the entitlement that people in that industry have just waltzing into some suburban area.
I think this story is funny because it's like, yeah, good. You got to experience what everyone else is probably experiencing in that city. Like, we are not allowed to talk realistically about crime in this country unless it... Could you imagine interrupting our television production? How could they do that?
I also want to point out that if you go between if you look at this article, I read like about 5 versions of this article from Variety, from The Hollywood Reporter, and then you read the ones from the local stations, and there's a specific language inflection where when it's the local stations, they said the film production was shut down by an extortion threat made by local gang members. And then if you go and look at the ones from the Hollywood Reporter and Variety, it says the production was shut down when a group of locals came to the set, and I'm like they were trying their best to not
It's just like the local. It's like the local PTA.
Yeah,
like they're just coming in being like
$50,000, please.
If you could please pay us.
Like, who do you think?
They make it sound like it's like a parking ticket.
But that's the thing. I think because Hollywood, in some ways, is so removed from the realities that so many Americans are facing, that they feel like they can't even say like criminals. It's like houseless person or whatever.
The unhomed.
The unhomed. Like they're coming up with these things
Yeah.
because they would rather not sound like they may or may not be insulting or judging the city, because it's more important to protect their image of themselves than to be realistic about the places that we are operating. Or especially like people live in the city, and like we suddenly are hearing about this when a production is shut down. Like how many businesses have to get shut up before we're like, yes, Hollywood, gang violence is real in major cities across America.
Even the one about Justified, that's like, an incendiary device was thrown on a Chicago film set. I'm like, well, what about like the incendiary device that is Chicago every weekend for like 3 days in a row?
How could you say that? Yep. It's a vibrant city.
And then, and to your point about like they're disconnected from reality, and we have this part from now. It's Breitbart, so it's a little hyperbolic.
Sure.
Natalie Portman, who supported defunding the police, now benefiting from Baltimore PD protection after criminals threaten her Apple TV series set. And they point out that she said this in 2020. She says, 2 years ago, at the height of the Black Lives Matter riots, Natalie Portman penned a lengthy message on her official Instagram account in which she explained how she overcame her initial doubts about the defund the police movement, saying that she hadn't realized her white privilege. She says, and I quote, "When I first heard hashtag defund the police, I have to admit, my first reaction was fear. My whole life, police have made me feel safe. But that's exactly the center of my white privilege," she wrote. Portman concluded that the system that makes me feel comfortable is wrong.
So basically, pay them the $50,000
Because
or shut up.
Yeah, really, I don't understand what she's doing. Like, it's privilege to be able to say that you won't.
They're also kind of exhausting the resource that the police are to Baltimore when they're not filming in Baltimore by getting their protection.
To be fair, the police in Baltimore aren't super effective anyway. So I guess if they're being effective in one, they're like,
guess so.
Chalk it up to their scorecard. We're doing good protecting the rich people. We're just not doing so good protecting our actual community.
I mean, in some ways I feel bad for Baltimore because it is such an interesting city, and it really has gone through an insane evolution as American history and American culture has progressed. That being said, I think that trying to constantly say, oh, Baltimore is a vibrant city and it's good to film there, never actually addresses. I would love for Baltimore to have a thriving film industry. I would love for there to be thriving film industries outside of Hollywood, but this is not it. This is, I think, not white privilege, but celebrity privilege.
Even Hollywood is
Hollywood
not necessarily
privilege to be able to be like, we don't need to think realistically about the crime. Like, that's like saying I'm a famous person, so I should be able to walk in a dangerous neighborhood because I won't get hurt.
It's not like LA is a beacon of like a great looking city right now. I do want to point out so that this show, it's based on a book called Lady in the Lake by Laura Lippman. Again, that is David Simon's wife. And it says, I'm just going to give people a brief description of it. So perhaps they may want to watch this when it comes out. It says, set in 1960s Baltimore, an investigative journalist working on an unsolved murder clashes with a woman working to advance the agenda of the city's black community. The protagonist ditches her doting husband and big Pikesville home to pursue a career as a newspaper reporter. Well, Yas Queen Slay.
Natalie Portman is just addicted to the Yas Queen Slay roles.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't she?
Because she's a queen and she slays.
Which is funny because I watched V for Vendetta this weekend, and she's fantastic in that movie, and she Yas Queen slays in that plenty. It's just she Yas Queen slays in a more awesome and less predictable way. She becomes obsessed with unraveling the mystery of two separate killings, that of 11-year-old Tessie Fine and a bartender named Cleo Sherwood. So I don't know if it was originally going to have Lupita Nyong'o in it, but they've replaced her with Moses Ingram. So if you like the other actress
Nyong'o is like talented.
Yes.
Though.
Well, I'm seeing in the other headlines Lupita's name is still being listed as a star in the show. Maybe she's just not.
Maybe she just refused to film in Baltimore. It's like it's dangerous there. You move production.
Maybe she changed roles. I don't know. And they still wanted her in a different role.
No, it says in May 2022, Nyong'o exited the series, and Moses Ingram would be cast to replace her in June. So they might not have the most. It's got Mike Epps in it. Mike Epps is great. Natalie Portman's great when she wants to be, just not recently. I do want to point out that if the character is to be played by Moses Ingram is extremely stoic, She will be fantastic in this
She
role.
did well in Queen's Gambit.
Yeah.
I don't think she's totally lacking in personality. She just wasn't casted correctly for Reva.
As long as she
And
doesn't
then
have to have a
we-
lightsaber.
Yeah, like that it wasn't the right role for her.
No, it was not.
So maybe
seems
this will
more-
be different.
This seems more up her alley.
Yeah.
Right? So, I don't know if this is going. Like I said, every time these stories have come up before, we had the one about Law and Order. That one happened. I was like, eh. Then I had the first one about, because that one felt more like news rather than
It's adding
entertainment.
up in the same way that it was adding up when we saw like people throwing things at like concert goers throwing objects at performers.
Did you see
like
Harry-
Lady Gaga and Harry Styles.
Chicken nuggets thrown at Harry
And
Styles.
I think it happened to Kendrick
fun.
Lamar. I think
Yeah.
it happened to Kid Cudi.
Kid Cudi like stopped the show. He's like, I'm stopping the show if you do that again, and then they just did it anyways. So.
Yeah.
But
That was ramping up too. It's just like
I think-
everything's getting a little more chaotic.
I think we are becoming an increasingly confrontational and violent society. I mean, that's just the way it is. I would be curious, so I don't mean to get too boring on this, but like to look at violent crime or confrontational crime numbers in
Yeah.
the last year and see how they've developed. I think, when COVID set in and then we had all those riots that one summer.
I remember that
If
summer.
you guys want to talk about that, but I know we don't want to get political. People were saying, everyone's been cooped up inside and they're frustrated. And then this really just sparked all sorts of racial tension. And I think in some ways we are.
I mean, it's not like this is
encouraging
racial.
No,
This
it's not
is
that it's
just-
racial, but it's
yeah.
like we are encouraging, or in some instances, we are okay with violent and aggressive behavior, and we are no longer able to contain
Thank
it
you.
to certain aspects of society. Like being like, well, if you're doing it in protest, it's okay. Like, why is it okay when you're doing it in protest versus doing it just to be disruptive on a film set? Like,
Also,
if
like
you
you
feel
said-
like this city is yours, if you're, I don't know, a gang member or just a criminal who feels like this is my city and even Hollywood can't roll in here and do whatever they want, like, why wouldn't you do this? Especially if there are no consequences.
And like you said, like Hollywood's the bubble in the West Coast of being unable to like call this stuff out because they're afraid of what that will say, what they think
Yeah.
that says about them,
And, like,
means
a-
that it's a self-perpetuating problem.
Yeah, and in a lot of West Coast cities, like they have lots of rules that allow people who are arrested for crime, like shoplifting or like misdemeanors, to be released the same day. So
Thanks,
in some
Soros.
ways, I wonder if they're just like, oh, well, the West Coast is different, so we'll go film there. But it's actually
Well, they said no arrests have been made in this Baltimore
Yeah.
case.
And there will not be.
There
and I
won't
don't
be.
think there will be, even though it would be, I think, relatively easy to find these people.
How about this? It'll be a hilarious segment. We'll do a mea culpa where if they actually get arrested, we'll cover it. But I
if
don't
they
think
get
that's
arrested,
happening.
if they get arrested, we'll take bets on how long until they get released.
Yes.
Because again, we have a cultural attitude towards crime, which is led by Hollywood and by a lot of cities on the West Coast that influences especially Democratic strongholds like Baltimore on the East Coast. But I won't get any more political about it.
Does this show interest you guys? Does this type of show interest you guys?
It sounds super preachy.
Yes.
It sounds like She-Hulk Attorney at Law. It
Yes, Queen Slay.
sounds
Attorney
like
at Law.
Jane Foster Part 2.
This is based off like a true crime book, right?
Yeah,
And-
it's based off, like I said, this is based off of Laura Lippman, who is David Simon's wife, who actually was a reporter at the Baltimore Sun,
See,
like he was.
That sounds interesting, except for the fact that
In
th-
theory.
there's it's going to be
That she's a
infused with
character.
like I would be interested in reading her book, but I don't trust Natalie Portman's interpretation
No.
of this situation.
And that's interesting because, like, we had Tokyo Vice, which was the Ansel Elgort show,
Which I still wanna see.
that was based on a reporter's experience as a crime novel, or I'm sorry, as a crime reporter in Tokyo,
Mm-hmm.
right? In Tokyo, like that's interesting, where the character is like the main character of the story. This feels a little too preachy for my
Well,
interest.
Yeah.
And The Wire, I mean, the Ansel
The
Elgort
Wire.
one is
Oh,
interesting
Tokyo Vice.
because the Tokyo Vice is interesting because it's like this Western reporter who has to both learn about the culture of Japan and the underground crime scene. So he's like really he's observing this world that you wouldn't be exposed to, which is interesting. And I think in some ways that was what was interesting about The Wire. Even though it is an American city, it is unlike a lot of places in the U.S. It gives you an insight into a culture that is unique to that area. With this story, I don't know that I need to watch it because there's like an overabundance of female-oriented true crime podcasts and books. I don't know that Natalie Portman has enough of a. Is she directing or is she just in it?
She's a star.
She's
She's probably producing. I want to point
I don't
out
know
some,
that anyone on that team has enough of a unique perspective to make this stand out from any other true crime thing that's out there. You know,
it reminded me of some stuff that came up about The Wire. And by the way, this is my monthly reminder to you that if you have not watched The Wire or you have not watched The Wire recently, do yourself and everyone around you a favor. Go and rewatch.
Brett dutifully shills for The Wire.
Watch The Wire. According to Andre Royo, the mayor hated us because he thought we made Baltimore look bad. He told the cops to come down on us for anything. Jaywalking, resisting arrest, loitering. People got arrested. Production was postponed sometimes because people were locked up. People went missing for a couple days at a time, but it was a crazy time. This is like the opposite, right? So they were actually confrontational with the cops to get it produced at this time because the mayor felt that it made the city look bad. Now the cops are just inept because the city doesn't want them to be. How would you categorize it? Like the police department.
The city and their mayor are aware of the problems just as much as the people on set are now. Yep. It's also just like insane to me how they came up to this man brandishing weapons, like literally pointing them at him, threatening his life, and they're acting so casual about it afterwards.
Yep. I reckon it's just weird because I go through and I was watching like when you see The Wire, it's like just post 9/11. So it's like our focus was elsewhere at that time. So the show was almost allowed to exist because of the time period.
Okay.
So now there isn't a war in Iraq that allows modern versions of shows like this to be created. So if the city's going to be the main theme of a project like this, it has to be a period piece where they have to be preachy about American issues that went on in the 60s, right? I bet you that this show, without the hook of the book, never gets greenlit unless they make it about racialized elements.
Well, it's unfortunate because the original story could have been really interesting. Yeah. I haven't read the book, obviously, but then they're just going to bastardize it because, like, Natalie Portman wants to feel like a girl boss.
Well, she is
she's turned into one of the worst ones.
Yeah. Yep.
I would be
and like Emma Watson levels of preachy.
I would be interested in seeing one of these like girl boss actresses who's really cool and wears like suit jackets, playing a like non-feminist character and seeing how the reaction to that experience is.
What would that even mean, though?
In today's day and age.
Like being able to take on
non-feminist or anti-feminist, or like just in her behavior or in how she identifies personally. Like, how do you even incorporate that into a story?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is like anti-feminist is someone who actively speaks openly about being opposed to feminism, whether that's like second, first, third wave. Like, we know it's someone who doesn't believe in anti-feminism, but I would be more interested in seeing them play a role where the person is sort of apolitical but continues to operate in a lot of female roles. So like a character that, and I don't have a specific story in mind, it's not like I can name someone, but someone who does stay at home with her kids, and her story isn't about her being an oppressed housewife, but that is an aspect of what she's doing. I'm tired of seeing actresses like this who have their own perspective of the world confirmed by the stories that they elect to be a part of. I think in some ways they're not challenged enough to think critically about how someone who is different than they are, who enjoys being at home or enjoys some aspects of feminine culture. Again, not that they are openly anti-feminist and raging against the machine, but just like someone who
I
has
think
a more
you should play characters that make you, that are like foils to who you really are sometimes. Like, you should do things that make you uncomfortable.
But so that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying that like,
and that would be an
anti-feminist, but I think it could also be someone who is just more accepting and balanced in their relationship with femininity versus like,
and no one's writing that. That's
no
the
one's
problem.
writing it. That's
like,
the problem.
Even if they wanted a role like that, or they would be open to it, no one is offering it.
I don't think
to
they'd be
them.
open to it, and in part, I think it's like it's a system that feeds itself. They don't think Natalie Portman would take it, so no one is greenlighting a writer who may have written.
No,
this
the
character.
studio will not approve that role. The
and
studio's not going to allow that movie to
so
get made.
she never gets the option to read it, but also they don't think she would play it. Like, if they presented this character to her, it would be insulting to her as this major equity-minded feminist, right? Like, it doesn't make sense, and ultimately we are never introducing new kinds of people into the narrative.
When was the last time you saw a movie about I'm literally mean at any point where a main theme for the main female character had to do with her being a great mom?
Well, they sometimes have to do with that, but also she secretly hates motherhood, or she.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm saying
sad.
without that like internalized message, where it's literally
Doctor
about
Strange. Wanda,
that might be, other than the homicidal maniac part, I said that was the part that tethered
an aspect of her character
that tethered it to me, like the part that made that believe.
What I'm thinking of is Emily Blunt in A Quiet Place.
Yes,
like she's very devoted.
Yeah. Or the character of Bryce Dallas Howard in Jurassic World Dominion,
but she's not even a traditional.
She's an adoptive mom.
Yeah,
but it's real. But
it's like I'm talking about like this is what I mean when I say that they can't write female characters to be females, because the hook of that movie isn't her being a great mom. The hook of that movie is dinosaurs.
Well, never mind about Dominion, because then they gave this whole example of motherhood that I found really messed up and disturbing.
The abhorrent part about the biological mom and
because she didn't want to just like have a normal biological child with a man, like with a father.
Sometimes you hear with Friends, like people are like, oh, it's so great the way Friends, the 90s sitcom, depicted motherhood in all these unusual ways. Like Phoebe's a surrogate mom, and then Rachel has a baby out of wedlock on her own, and then whoever,
which is not even reflective
what's the dark-haired girl,
like,
she like adopts a baby, and they're like, it's to show that there are lots of ways to become mother, which like there are different paths to motherhood, but like no one, that's also specifically trying to say like you don't need to follow a traditional path, even though we all know that creates more stability, and
Friends
children do better in
in
two-parent homes. Like why can't we also just say like it's cool and we should encourage people to choose partners carefully and be devoted to building a stable family unit for themselves and for their children.
I don't know if that's necessarily, I mean, I would put my money down that that's half ideological and half hack writers who don't know how to write that story interestingly. Like they're like, I can write an interesting mom if she's a witch who also wants to destroy a third dimension.
There has to be something sinister, like some twist to it, right?
They can't.
Which is why
also she can't just be at home. Like she has to be a witch who's also doing something.
And that's
else.
the same reason we're going to talk about Captain America, because it has to be Americana with a dark twist, or like with some reason that something's wrong with it.
Thanks for watching this clip, guys. If you want to see full episodes or follow us on social media, links are in the description below. Bye.